In this video, we have a special guest. His name is Akash. He's a senior product manager at Workday. In this video specifically, we're going to talk about his journey on how he became a product manager. Why did he go from a software developer to a product manager? And how did he make this transition? Then we're going to talk about how to prepare for a product manager's interview as a developer. Now, throughout this video, if you have any comments or any feedback or any video ideas that you'd like to see me make in the future, please comment down below. So Akash, thank you very much for being on the show. Can you tell us a bit more about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So, hello everyone. My name is Akash Majumder. I am a senior product manager at Workday. I've had a total experience of about 10 to 11 years in the IT segment, out of which 4 of them was as a software developer, after which I switched to the product management side. And talking with Eric today, we'll just try to, dive deep into how I started my entire career from an SDE and what pivoted me into product management and basically how other people can get into it.
Yeah, for sure. Now, before we begin, could you tell us a bit more about your current company at Workday as a senior product manager?
Absolutely. So Workday in itself is a giant organization, but what they do in general is they are a people management software. So human capital management or anything related to human capital management is where you would go for Workday. So think about yourself when you try to apply for a job. And after you apply for a job, your entire identity exists in that corporation, and everything from absence management to your pay stubs to your day-to-day discussions and collaborations, brainstorming, and so on and so forth, that exists inside Workday. And my responsibility in Workday is to work on the collaborations piece. So a lot of different consumers of Workday, like different product managers from different companies, use Workday to collaborate and bring in new ideas that improve the Workday platform, improve their day-to-day. And it's my responsibility to make sure their entire experience is seamless and innovative and up to the mark, where they are less process driven and more innovation driven. So that's my role at Workday in a nutshell.
Okay. So the first question that we have is your journey. So maybe you could tell us a bit more about, how did you get started as a PM and what do you do before PM?
Okay. So yeah, what I'm currently doing at Workday is, like I mentioned, working on the collaboration piece of Workday, which is a very small but a very, very important aspect of our customers' journey. Customers at Workday want to talk about their entire ecosystem of how they use Workday, how they interact with Workday, and how they can improve Workday. And it's my responsibility to kind of figure out what we can do better from a product-driven organization for these customers, and what tools we can provide them, both the external customers and our internal product managers, to support that flow of ideation throughout the process. And how did I start? So I started off, as I kind of mentioned, as a software developer or a software development engineer. But before that, I did my undergraduate at back in India, where I'm originally from, and I did it from Punjab Technical University. A lot of Indians probably know what Punjab Technical University is, but essentially, it's not really one of the high Ivy League organizations in India or across the world. So I would say I had standard start to my software development journey, and during that time, I started picking up a lot about how coding works, how developers create new things out of nothing. Basically, the creation of something out of nothing enticed me a lot, and that's why I started going into the development aspect of things. And I had a lot of great teachers in my engineering college, and they helped me out and connected me with like-minded individuals, as well as a lot of alumni of our college who were already in the development space. And after talking with them, I thought, yes, this seems like a good idea. And that idea of creating something from nothing always stuck in my head. And that's why I started working in software development. And this was back in, 2010. Okay. So that was a while back, I think. But anyways, and then when I started doing my engineering, and after I started coding, I was a software development engineer for, I'd say, about close to 4 years back in India as well. And while I was creating new code and loving it, by the way, I always had this nagging in the back of my brain, which kept asking me, why am I doing what I'm doing? What is this actually solving? And that's where I started to basically ask around. And one thing I tell a lot of people who always come up to me is, how did you start thinking this way? You start thinking this way by talking about it, especially with people around you, your managers, your mentors. Specifically, your mentors are amazing to help you inside and outside your organization. And one of my key mentors at the time was the CTO of the company I was working with. And he kind of mentioned that the questions that I'm asking, the why aspect, is something that a product manager does. So maybe I want to kind of try to figure out if that's a path I want to take on. And I started going into some podcasts, some books, like the PM's Dummy Guide and so on and so forth, and try to figure out what a product manager does. And that's basically was my pivot from an engineering aspect where I do the what am I creating, into the product management aspect, which is more business side, and why am I creating what I'm creating. And that's when I transitioned over to trying to get an MBA. And I left India to come to Canada here in Vancouver, and I did my MBA from University of British Columbia, Sauder School of Business. And once I completed my MBA here, I started that direct pivot from an engineering level mindset to a product mindset. And that is a very interesting pivot because you already know the technical aspect of what you're going to create. But when you combine it with the business style, it really makes you a very unique candidate across the board.
And I noticed that you were also a operation management in the past.
Yeah.
What is it like? What is it about? Is it similar to PM or is it a little bit different?
Yeah, so operation management is a very interesting title because at the beginning of when I started that role, I didn't think operation management is going to be similar, but operation management also has same of those transitional values where you start gathering requirements about certain supply chain aspects of a product that you're trying to get into. So I was an operations manager at Cedar Line Industries, and they were basically handling the Western red cedar lumber remanufacturing of products. And it was my responsibility to make sure that the inventory coming in was directly correlating to the inventory going out. So you have to have a very strong grasp of, amount of input, and then going through a particular process system, and then taking the output and, basically creating something from raw into a finished product. And that is kind of similar to what we do when we talk about actual technology aspects, where you have these raw libraries, raw pieces of code, and you convert that into a feature. So a lot of things, especially even if you're not in the technology fields, even if you're in something like the lumber industry or the cruise industry and so on and so forth, it's very good to have those aspects, and you can easily transition into a product management.
I see. So it requires a lot of like wide variety of understanding about the product that you're building. And that kind of like leads you into the next role, which is, technical product manager at, I think was called Expedia Group, right?
Yes, that is correct.
What's the difference between technical product manager and just a regular product manager? Is there a difference, or is there just like a slightly variation of that?
That's a very good question. And that's something that I've been asked multiple times. So I'll set the record straight here. So on title, if you take a title by its name, a technical product manager, like the name suggests, you need to understand the technical aspects. You need to understand how the architecture level design works. You need to understand, let's say, REST API calls and so on and so forth. You need to be able to code at least a basic level, or better than that, you need to be able to understand code at a basic level. That's what a technical product manager does. But if you're a product manager, again, based on just the title, you don't necessarily need to have that level of understanding. You would be more business focused, where you would try to look at your competitors and figure out what the feature that they are trying to push to market is. And you would figure out why it is that important to the market. And that requires minimal technical knowledge, but a lot of business acumen, a lot of survey responses and Hotjar responses, and so on and so forth. So there are two aspects of product management all the time. There's the technical side and the business side. And on a title level, a business side would be a product manager, but a TPM or a technical product manager would be a mix of both.
Got it. So it does require you to know the coding side of things, but also like the system, the infrastructure side of things as well, right?
That is correct. Yes.
I see. Now, for getting to your first TPM after you were a operations management role, role, how difficult was it to get into a TPM? Is it a really smooth transition because they saw that you have background in technology, so they gave you this role, or was it very, very difficult? Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Absolutely. So it is not that easy to get into product management, especially if you know product management is a very well sought after role. So there's a lot of competition out there. So my idea of how a product manager or a potential product manager works is they look into their network, right? They start talking in their network and trying to figure out where the connections lie when you're trying to break into product management. A good rule of thumb here would be where I moved from a Western red cedar lumber remanufacturing organization, which was Cedar Line, into Expedia Group, which was a technology-based technology-based travel organization.
Yeah.
And how that works out is you start looking at the role that they are posting and you start correlating them with the transitional values that you have, including your engineering background. Engineering background plays a huge pivotal role because that uniquely segregates you from the non-engineers. And that would be a +1 to your role as well, especially if you're trying to apply for a TPM role. But then you want to connect with other TPMs in the same organization and kind of get a feel about what is their day-to-day so that you can correlate that with what your day-to-day is. And if there are any gaps, you start going into Udemy or Coursera or all these amazing online platforms to fill that gap so that you can tell your interviewer, I don't have this information, but this is what I'm doing to compensate for that.
I see. So it's really important to network with other people and trying to, because like you mentioned earlier, it's really competitive. So network is really, really important.
Absolutely.
I see. Now, speaking of, TPM, the other question that I want to ask you is how much technical side do you have to know? Like in the interview, is it testing you on coding questions, like lead code kind of style, or do they mostly ask you about like system design or some particular technology or system or anything? Like, could you tell us a bit more about that a bit more?
Absolutely. So you're right, but let me break it down into a different style then. So it depends on which level you're trying to get into for a TPM. If you're at an entry level, which is what we call an associate technical product manager, that wouldn't really be as extreme as creating system level designs. But there would be the standard questions about if, let's say, it's a Java stack organization, they would ask you what object oriented programming is, right?
Yeah.
And they would ask you also about, how would you do memory heap allocation and all those kind of things. These are standard questions. With your engineering background, you should be able to answer these. At the same time, the higher up you start going, or the more demanding the role is, there may be questions about designing a system that you think is scalable up to, let's say, X amount of transactions per second. So you have to have a little bit of understanding about how a backend works, how the API would work, and how a front end would work. And in the interview, you may have to design that from scratch, but you would only be high levels, like an example of what a REST API call is, an example of what a JSON response is, for example.
Got it. Got it. I see. So now then you also move from Expedia Group to, Global Relay, which is also a technical program manager. So is it very similar to the previous role or is it somewhat different?
It was a little bit different compared to Expedia Group because at Global Relay, if you've heard of Global Relay, they are located here in downtown Vancouver and they have a very interesting concept of what a product manager does and what a program manager does. And they do combine from time to time. And a lot of the combination comes in where you have to work on a day-to-day basis on creating Scrum backlog items and creating the next sprint and so on and so forth. So you are kind of blending the roles a little bit between what a product manager does, which is more high level vision, plus what a Scrum Master does, which is keeping the engineering team on their toes and asking them on a day-to-day basis or on a sprint by sprint basis what the status of the feature is, if there's any blockers, and what can be done to get rid of those blockers. And that was a very good experience for me because I did have experience with engineers, but at the same time, I wanted to understand more about what their problems were. So the TPM, which is technical program manager role at Global Relay was an eye opener for me to kind of understand how engineers think. And I can also be one of the engineers, so to speak, to help understand what kind of problems they're facing and what I can do or what someone else can do to solve that problem.
Got it. Got it. And then later, after Global Relay, you also moved into a senior product management role or senior
Mhm.
product manager role. Now, is it still a technical product manager, or is it just product manager, like you mentioned, more focused on the business side of things?
Yeah, that's exactly my point when I was talking about before. If you take something on a level, so when I moved over, I always wanted to keep my core, which was the engineering side, intact. So when I was interviewing with Active State, I made sure to tell them that I have a good technical background and I want to keep doing that. So my senior PM role was very, very technical as well. I worked a lot on high level architecture designs with system architects, with design UI, UX. At the same time, I was also very high level into what a feature is supposed to be, what a vision of a product is, what our 30, 60, 90-day or longer than that kind of time frame looks like. So so a lot of people do move into more business focused idea and leave the technical aspects to other technical product managers, so to speak. But I
Mhm.
wanted to keep my engineering side intact because I see a lot of value there. And
Yeah.
the higher up you go, the more interesting the problem becomes, the more vague the problem becomes. And I always keep asking myself, why do we do these kind of things? So I want to keep that mindset going, I guess.
I see. Very, very interesting. Now, my next question is, like you mentioned, I think you already answered that question, like
Mhm.
from SDE to a PM, why do you transition? But I also want to make a follow-up question. Have you ever considered to be a, for example, software developer manager, for example, where you
Mhm.
also have to, get a better understanding of the overall structure or overall system of the application that the engineerings are building? Have you considered about that role?
It would be a lie to say I haven't. So I definitely say I have. And one thing that I'm trying to kind of figure out about myself as I go along in my journey is if I am a people manager or a people leader, or if I'm an individual contributor where I
Yeah.
can just focus on the work that I do and not really worry or be that much concerned about people under me. And at this point in my career, I want to push myself a bit to the breaking point to figure out how capable I am as an individual contributor. You always have the ability to move into a people leader role, which is what a software development manager does. Their
Hmm.
responsibility is very much split between working on the very technical aspects of, architecture design, scalability, and so on and so forth. But at the same time, they have to make sure that the people under them, the software developers or the software development engineers, are happy and they are promoted and they have what they need to, make their career transitions as they go forward. That was something I didn't want to take on, and I still don't want to take on at this point in my career. But because I haven't left my engineering tax rusting, I still have the ability to switch over to a software development manager or an engineering manager in the future if I do like it. But one of the reasons that's stopping me is I like understanding people. I like understanding our customers and what makes them tick. As a software manager, you don't really get the chance to talk to your customers. And that's something that has also been stopping me from transitioning into a extremely technical role. Whereas in the PM, you have that split between the business and the technical side.
I see, I see. So basically PM is more customer facing, whereas software manager it communicate with the PM and also have to communicate with the engineering team to figure out how to build a product. So you're more into customer facing and like you mentioned, building the product from the start, right?
Exactly.
I
Yes.
see. Now, my other question is for people who are considering, listen to this far, super interested about transition to maybe a product manager or a technical product manager from a
Mhm.
software developer engineer standpoint. How would you make, or what would you recommend? What are some advice could you give to transition from A to B?
Yeah, that's a very loaded question and an interesting one for sure. So the first thing I would ask the software development engineer is to kind of list out what they think they are going to receive when they transition into a PM. For example, if you like asking the question why, I think I've said it a few times now, but if you like trying to figure out the nitty-gritty of things, why does something tick the way that it does? And why are people doing what they're doing? It's a good good bet that you would love product management, because product managers are basically given carte blanche to figure out a problem without quite understanding what the problem is. So at the same time, it comes with a high level of risk, but you feel an extreme sense of accomplishment when you kind of figure out that vague problem that's been gnawing away at not just you, but probably everyone in your entire organization. And the other aspect of moving into an SDE to a PM would be if you feel that the exposure to the technology side is getting a bit too much for you, so that you want to have the technical acumen, but you don't want to keep up to date with the cutting edge stuff of things. For example, in Python, Matplotlib, and so on and so forth, these technologies will keep on getting better and better and more complicated as we go on. So
Mhm.
you need to kind of figure out if that is some place that you want to put in your effort, or you're more interested in understanding why Matplotlib libraries are so important to you, or why it gets used the way it does. So that's where I would say a PM would be a great opportunity for you. So
Right.
yeah, these are the ones that come to my mind off the top of my head.
I see. But like if someone or have a really good understanding about why they want to transition to a PM, like
Mhm.
what's the journey that you will recommend? How should they begin? Like, do you think that they should start to just apply to technical product manager role, or do you think they should get some experience like with some other roles, like you mentioned, like operation management?
Mhm.
Like, what do you suggest to begin?
I think it's never too early to apply for product management roles, even if you don't have that much confidence in yourself. Because one thing that I keep doing is if you do apply to roles that you feel that you are not really capable for, when the interview does happen, and that's also a struggle, but when and if the interview does happen, you get feedback about what's missing from you. A lot of technical recruiters are very great about the feedback, and you kind of see where your gaps are. At the same time, you can even look at the roles that you're interested in and see where your gaps are. Now, to put in that first step, a great way would be to just talk to your manager and see if there's rotational programs inside your own organization that you can take part of, like an SDE, for example, inside Microsoft, where you have the ability to have rotational programs where you can just try out being a product manager for a couple of months, and that works out for you. You can start that discussion with your manager on how you can transition forward. If you don't have those opportunities, then you can reach out to other product managers on LinkedIn, on any of the social platforms that you use, and just try to get them to have a quick chat with you. I'm always open to a chat as well, to kind of figure out where you're at and what the gaps are. And once you know what your gaps are, you start looking into, books, or you start looking into Coursera, Udemy, any kind of online platforms where you can figure out what that missing gap is and learn more about it yourself at your spare time, so that you can fill it up and you can start doing your own personal projects to prove that what you've done so far is worth it. And that is something you can definitely mention in your resume as you go along in interviewing for PM roles. That's something that I did, and it has been pretty useful for me so far. But I would highly suggest you take that first step and reach out to people for sure. Worst case they can do is say no, right? And then you just talk to the next person in line. No big problem.
I see. 100% agree on there. Now, you mentioned that every interview, it also gives, even though a candidate might fail, but it's a feedback for, where to learn and where to improve. I think I 100% agree on that. Now, for, like you also mentioned, that reaching out to internal in the company to also, explore, or like you mentioned, rotation, that's also could be another option. And you also mentioned that personal project is one. Now, for software developers, we all know, like, personal project, you build something and then you demonstrate that in your on your resume, or maybe like a GitHub link
Yes.
for your project. But for product manager, what kind of personal project are you talking about?
Great question. So a product manager does not necessarily need to have the GitHub links, the engineering project, and so on and so forth. What you kind of want to showcase is how you think, right? So a product manager portfolio could be just a use case. It could be a use case of how you think, for example, existing industries, let's say like the cruise industry, is slow on the uptake on digital payment platforms, and how you or your potential product can solve that problem. You would investigate how many of these cruise industries are, on the low end side of the traditional payment platform, and get that information into your use case. And then you start thinking about what what an MVP of your product would start looking like. And you can take advantage of a lot of statistics online. Amazing website that I like is statistica.com. And you can just go through there and try to figure out what kind of customer base you're trying to target. And that just kind of becomes like your product portfolio, so to speak. And you can publish that either in GitHub or your own website. And you can just connect that into your LinkedIn, or you can connect that into your resume. These are things that are super useful for an interviewer like me, because I kind of get an idea about how you think about things. Because I already know that your engineering is pretty good looking at your resume. But if I get a chance to look into how you think about products, how you think about the world around you, that kind of helps me figure out where you could be a good fit and what basically makes you interested, what keeps you up at night, right?
I see. I see. Very interesting. Got it. Now, my another question is, I think you already mentioned that prepping PM's interview, how to prep them. Like you mentioned, just to sum up, like you mentioned, having a personal project where you can be able to research about a product. Now, does it have to be a specific product that, let's say, I'm interviewing for Expedia. Do I have to build or do I have to have portfolio project, like you mentioned, specific for Expedia, like you mentioned, like travel related stuff? And if I apply to somewhere else, for example, like Global Relay, do I have to make a different project that's specific for that particular company, problem that's solved by that particular company? Or do you think it could be varied?
Yeah, that's a very good question. So in a nutshell, no, you don't really have to have a personal project specific to that role that you're applying for,
Yeah.
because it kind of, I mean, if an interviewer is smart enough, it kind of feels like you are, setting them up. You are just creating that project for the heck of creating a project, right? That's something that if we need to ask you, we'd ask you during the interview to, create a use case, create a presentation, and so on and so forth. So a personal project is something that's personal to you, something that keeps nagging at you and you want to solve that problem. So, and a good thing about PM specifically is a lot of your thought processes, a lot of things that you do, are transitional. So just think about things that you would like to solve in the world. And if you articulate them in a way that's very product management specific, that would be perfect. And this is where I would transition into learning about how a product manager thinks. A lot of good resources, for example, is Marty Kagan. He's a very great product management expert, and he has a lot of good insights about how an ideal product manager should behave. And there's amazing podcasts online. An example would be Masters of Scale by Reid Hoffman, where it teaches you not just from a product, but how great companies are made, how great leaders think. And these are things that you kind of want to do on a ad hoc basis, something that you don't really have to think about, something that you just talk about in general as you spend your day. And this is just make your preparation more organic than something that you have to force yourself to do on a day-to-day basis.
Nice, got it. But in terms of like preparation, how do you think that a product manager should prepare the interview? Just to finish this slide, to make sure that people maybe just jumpstart to this part of the video, they want to see how you can prepare your interview. Could you just like sum up what are some things that maybe we should watch out for, or maybe people who are preparing for PM, what should they watch out for? How can they make their resume or their candidate stand out?
Okay, great question, actually. So the first thing that you need to do, and you kind of, touch base on that, is know your resume inside out, right? Any line item that you do, let's say you delivered a certain feature as a engineer, as anything, you need to know what you did and why you did it. So one template that I ask a lot of people to implement when they put in any line item into their resume, in their CV, is I delivered X so that Y, which resulted in Z. So these three aspects kind of help us understand you did something that was fixing a problem and it made the company or made you or made others this value add. So that's how you should set up some of your line items in your resume, because it helps you start talking about like a product manager. That's one thing. And the other thing that you probably should start looking at is making sure that you don't have as much technical jargon into your resume line items as you would have as a software development engineer. You kind of want to transition those terminologies into what was the end result results, and how did you help achieve that? So those are things that I look out as an interviewer whenever I see a resume that comes up in my before me. And I think, yeah, that would be a great first step if you can take that. It will definitely get you in at the first door for sure.
Got it. Nice, nice. Now, the last part of it, very, very quickly, just to talk about if you have any final words for people who are preparing for being a PM, or who are thinking about being a PM, or who is currently a developer trying to explore different options. Do you have any final words or final advice do you want to give out?
Sure. I think my advice is definitely going to be do not be afraid to take that step. A lot of people that I know are just happy with what they are, or happy probably is not the right word, complacent with what they are. If you are interested in a product management role, just reach out to your network, reach out to me, reach out to anyone that you have a good working relationship with, and start asking about what product managers do. It is a very exciting time to be a product manager because you try to understand concepts or ideas that no one has thought of before, and you're going to bring it to life with the help of engineers, with the help of UI UX, and you're going to work with a lot of different people and not just engineering. So you work with everyone across the board, from your C-suite level individuals to engineering to UI UX, and it's a lot of fun and when you do it, to be honest. And it is a great career aspect as well when you move over from a senior PM to a principal to a director to a VP and so on and so forth. And that transition is also pretty fast. So as a SDE trying to move in, I would definitely recommend you just have that first talk and see where it goes. Always keep an open mind for sure.
I see. And another question that I also want to ask you is, do you think MBA matters when someone wants to be a product manager?
I think it does matter. Maybe not in the initial phase, or it may not seem like it would matter in the initial phase for you when you break into PM, but it definitely helps out as you keep going up the ranks. You may not need it to break into product management, but the idea is if you're doing an MBA, you have like-minded individuals beside you who are also doing their product management career journeys, and you start having that network grow around you and everyone's in the same boat. So that definitely helped me a lot to get my PM role much faster because I had people who were in the same boat as me who I could rely on.
Got it. Got it. Awesome. So yeah, so those are the questions that we have for this show. So yeah, thank you. Thank you very much for Akash for attending this meeting. And it's very helpful for anybody, for developers to consider, to give us more insights about either this path is for them or not. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you so much, Eric. It was a pleasure to be here.
Now, this is it for this video. Thank you very much for watching this far. Now, if you're interested to see more of this content, please consider like and subscribe this channel.